So Nathaniel, you mentioned Menelik and Haile Selassie's times as sort of like, the golden era for Ethiopia. And those
part of their times, not all, but part of it, yes.
Okay. These two rulers or like kings are definitely like very controversial in Ethiopian history. And there is like a segment of like Ethiopians that have seen the brutality of these rulers. They claim when we have these two things existing at the same time, how can we acknowledge this thing and like move forward?
Well, these two leaders have led Ethiopia for a very long time. Emperor Menelik for about 23 years, Emperor Haile Selassie for about 42 years. Between them, it's about 65 years. A lot happened during their reign. When they were consolidating power, there were conflicts, there were human rights abuses, but we need to recognize the fact that these people, these leaders, are leaders from the 19th century. Absolutely unfair to judge them by today's human rights standards. About their legacy right now, the reason why it was controversial partly is what I have described earlier. Left-leaning students' movement in the 60s needed to create something to rally against, and they have crafted these narratives about Emperor Haile Selassie, ethno-nationalists about Emperor Menelik. Interestingly, one of the ethno-nationalists who actually was part of creating this narrative, I can mention his name is Lencho Bati, said that, well, one of the reasons why we have created Emperor Menelik, the story that we told about Emperor Menelik, particularly for Oromo youth of the time, that's some 50 years ago, is because we needed a uniting narrative. We never expected that it will carry on until now and create a problem. And mostly we just made it up. Also foreign writers who have religious interests in Ethiopian history, they wanted to go to the south and baptize, and they were in competition with the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. Therefore, they wanted to create a figure, an Orthodox figure that the people in the south would hate. And they used to write stories about particularly Emperor Menelik and Emperor Haile Selassie. Having said that, I didn't mean that during their time, no crime, I didn't mean crime, no human rights abuses were done. I'm not saying that. There were conflicts, especially in the South. But the conflict was not, it was not between the people. It was between the governors who were in that area and the emperor who wanted to consolidate his power. And the atrocities that they were committed actually were committed by people, by governors who actually were governing the areas. And that's actually documented very well. Yesterday, there was a documentary Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed himself narrated. There were a lot of historical artifacts that were stored in the Jubilee Palace. A lot of people mix the Menelik Palace and the Jubilee Palace. The Jubilee Palace is the larger palace. It is only being used for residence of the president and just receiving guests. The Menelik Palace is the actual office. So he opened a lot of artifacts yesterday and showed that. And one of the fascinating things that I have seen is handcraft that were sent to Emperor Menelik by Abba Jafar. Abba Jafar is an Oromo king, a Muslim in Jimma. Usually in these days, today he's being portrayed that he actually resisted on behalf of Oromos. When we actually see from the evidence, the actual artifact, he was actually used to send gifts to Menelik. I mean, he died, being a very close friend to Menelik. But what we have led to believe about the conflict that Emperor Menelik had in early 1800s, the narrative is totally different from, what we actually see based on evidences and artifacts and archaeological documents. There are documents, and from what we see from them and what we're being told by ethno-nationalists are totally different things. We need to acknowledge that these were 19th century, 18th century leaders. They have done some things that's not acceptable for us today, and move on.
Obviously, this is not my place to on what Nati has been saying about, Emperor Menelik and Emperor Haile Selassie, and how these two governments oppressed or enslaved their, say, for instance, Oromo communities. That's not my place to litigate this part of Ethiopian history. Hopefully, you're not expecting a response from me about this.
How do you see the current rulers or governments of Eritrea and Ethiopia are handling these respective narratives of this country? Are they transcending it? Is there some type of closure in those historical ones, or are they reinforcing it? How do you see the current climate?
I'm not very much neutral about this because I've been known to criticize President Isaias. I have been made a target of Eritrean Ministry of Information at Oyemane personally. He has written, or he has allowed articles to be written mentioning my name on Hadass Eritrea and Eritrean profile. So I'm not very much neutral about that. I have criticized President Isaias, not only unnecessary interference in Ethiopian affairs and in Ethiopian politics, but also the way he treated his own youth. Just like Sami, one of the things that Sami and I agree is about the treatment of Eritrean youth by its government. So I'm not a friend of Eritrean government, and I do not like the way it conducts itself in the region, in its own country, interfering in Ethiopian affairs. I had an opportunity to work with Eritrean refugees some years ago, and I know what they have gone through, what they're going through. So I am in solidarity with them, despite I'm being told that it's none of your goddamn business so many times. These two countries, who I do sincerely believe their destinies have intertwined with each other, move forward. And I don't believe that it will be taking that long to actually get Eritrea back to its feet, because I know the people. It's very hardworking and very entrepreneurial and extraordinarily good people. The people who will be replacing President Isaias will not be as antagonistic, as interfering, not good people. And they will be more cooperative. They will be more forward-looking, and that's my hope.
Let me say a couple of points about this. First, as ordinary citizens, we don't have to invest our hopes in our respective governments. Usually, a progressive, radical, emancipatory politics emerge from ordinary citizens, not from the state. The state, by its nature, especially our states, are very oppressive, very violent, and whatever comes from the states, whatever comes from the governments, are usually going to be violent, usually going to be anti-democratic, usually going to be oppressive. I prefer us to put our hopes in ordinary citizens, and I hope we build our solidarity relationship on that basis. That said, I see many Ethiopians, Oromo friends and others, who are not happy about the kind of grand Ethiopians narrative that Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed is advancing. I sympathize with them. I understand their concerns. Well, Nati was dismissing them as extremist, ethno-nationalists. That's, by the way, a debate that should be had by Ethiopians themselves. I am not Ethiopian, so I don't have really a legitimate reason to discuss this, but I also see that Ethiopianism, Ethiopian history is very contested. Different people have different views about it. And I hope Ethiopians themselves would find really the wisdom, patience to listen to each other, to really, not dismiss their, concerns, their understanding, their perceptions, their histories, and promotes really a civil discourse about their past, about their present, and about the future. As I said last time, I was watching Lynch Oleta, by the way, the former vice chairperson of the Oromo Liberation Front, and he said something very beautiful that I agree with. You cannot build a democracy in Ethiopia and not having a democracy in Eritrea, or you cannot build a democracy in Eritrea and have a dictatorship or tyranny in Ethiopia. So these people are very connected, and they influence each other. And the only way to go, I guess, is not to go back to old, nostalgic, great narratives, but to be bold enough, to be radical enough to reimagine our politics, right? That ensures, everybody is equal, that everybody has a say in how she or he is governed, and we should be very attentive to, our diversity, gender diversity, class diversity, ethnic diversity. And we should really be creating a new political space where everybody feels like heard. Everybody feels like he's a citizen or she's a citizen. My hope is not in the States, but my hope is in ordinary citizens who are dare enough to create a radical political imagination outside narrow nationalism, outside narrow, whether it be ethnic or national chauvinism. I hope people would be able to create a different political space other than what we have in both countries. I am not also optimistic about the Ethiopian Prime Minister. He has all the signs and symbols that he will take the country back to where it was, and that would be not nice to Ethiopians too, and to Eritreans as well, to everybody in the Horn of Africa. So I hope we invest our energies, our imaginations, and our skills in ordinary citizens. I am a Marxist, so I would say we should always be mindful of our poor, our downtrodden, our underprivileged, and what have you.
Yeah, that was something that I was going to put out. That's we have had lots of radicalized politics that actually hurt us so much. Our biggest problems actually is radicalized view, radicalized politics, revolutionizing things. And we have political parties that went too far, killing each other's members on the streets because they didn't disagree, Derg is fascist or not. They just couldn't agree on that, so they decided to kill each other on the streets. They used to fight over a meaning of a word, and they used to kill each other on the streets. So radicalization is not the answer. I don't believe that it's the answer in Ethiopia and in Eritrea and anywhere else whatsoever. I mentioned Lench Obati and Lench Oleta. They are two different people. And the gentleman that you mentioned, Lench Oleta, is not only used to be the deputy chairman of OLF, he is one of the founders of OLF some 55 years ago. A very wise gentleman, because he believed that OLF, despite being the same age with EPLF and even older than TPLF, it has not achieved its goal because it did not have a clear vision about what it wanted. It didn't have a clear definition for a kind of self-determination that his party wanted. And because of that, now, 50 years later, they have divided into 6 or 7 political parties, maybe more now, political parties. And there is a lot to be learned from him, from what he would say. And I agree with you, Abi, that you quoted him on saying that there needs to be a democratic practice in all of Horn of Africa, because one country is what happens in one country in Horn of Africa influences the other.
What lessons, good or bad, can should or can we take from history? We have a beautiful saying in Tigrinya. At the end of any conversation, we're always like, "Kabsin tainu mahar," because history has to be with a purpose, like it has to have a purpose. It has to serve a purpose. So what lessons can be drawn so like we can have, as Sami was mentioning, like, a third way, a new way of reimagining the Horn of Africa? Like, how should we consume history?
The first thing that we need to learn is that what we have done, especially for the last 50, 55 years, have not worked. We brought foreign ideologies. They tore us apart, from not only from our history, but we need to look within our culture. I sincerely do believe, for example, that we have a better method of conflict resolution than what the Westerners provide to us as conflict resolution. We need to realize, we need to accept that we need each other. One of our really bad traits, I'm confidently saying this about both Eritreans and Ethiopians, we are very stubborn people. We're very stubborn. If we believe that something is right, we stick to it, even though it's proven that it's wrong. And it's on both of us. I know Sami probably would say that, no, you're wrong. In my bone, I believe that. We need to stop that. We need to admit that we need each other. Ethiopia needs Eritrea. Eritrea needs Ethiopia.
Just listening to you both talking, it seems like, these two countries have a different understanding of history. That
is absolutely true, but that's okay. That's okay. I mean, that goes for all countries, for all people. It is okay. I mean, we don't live by history. We learn history.
So my question is, we use history, like we go back to history and just like refer back to understand our future. And if we have different points of
and I understand that.
How do we move forward?
That is absolutely okay. From our narrative, there are a lot of good things and historical lessons that could be drawn from for us. For Eritreans, it's the same thing. In their narrative, there are a lot of good things, good lessons that they can draw from it. But we cannot continue over arguing about what happened 150 years ago. We cannot continue like that. We just need to, let's leave that for researchers, history teachers. Let's leave that to them. Then let's go forward. Let's see what's happening. The 21st century, everybody needs everybody else. We say globalization. Even more than that, these two people, these two countries are dependent on each other. They need each other. The only thing that we need to have a common understanding over is that fact, not the historical narrative. We can have our own historical narrative and we can draw lessons from them. The only thing that we need to have a common understanding over is that we need each other.
A historian, probably this is a professional bias, but the reason why we say history is important, history is very relevant, is because there is no like a clear watertight distinction between the past, the present, and the future. Always there is influence our present political sensibilities and vision and what have you is informed by what happened in the past, and what will happen in the future definitely would be informed by what happened in the past and by what is happening today. So there is no a way that we can say, okay, that's past. We shouldn't reckon with what happened. We should, but with the express aim of, how should I say, extracting a lesson, force us to formulate. And I must say, our respective states were created, were forged through war and violence. That's the foundational violence of our respective states was political violence, and that means of securing sovereignty, that means of creating a state, continues to define our societies, continues to define our respective states. Violence is very much part of the political space in our respective societies. As Nati was saying, political differences, historical differences are matched by, or they are not only litigated at a discursive level, but they spill over and they inform political violence. One of the things that I want us, for instance, to do as ordinary citizens or as professionals or as educated people, we shouldn't be willing mercenaries of the state. We should always create a critical distance from the state. We shouldn't always, be agents of the state. What should animate our politics, what should inform our positions should be the interest of our ordinary fellow citizens. If anything, if a political narrative, if a political policy or whatever doesn't serve ordinary Ethiopians and Eritreans, we should always be critiquing it, right? We shouldn't be a willing
participants
of the state. So that's one thing that I always see among Eritreans, among Ethiopians. They are always willing mercenaries of their respective states. Obviously, there are exceptions, but the general tendency is that they tend to celebrate, they tend to deify, they tend to kind of give intellectual imprimatur to the state discourse, to state policies, and that has been, as we have been discussing, that has been creating violence, that has been creating displacement. People, our respective people have been really victims of war, victims of oppression, victims of economic mismanagement, and you can have a long list of the misdeeds of states. And our politics should be, again, admitted. I was talking about radical politics. I was not meaning to say extremist politics, but to say to really question all the assumptions, the policies that came out from the mouth of our respective states, and see. The only calibration that we should make is okay, here is a policy, here is an idea. Does it really serve the purpose, the interest of ordinary Eritreans, ordinary Ethiopians? If it doesn't, we should have, the guts, the intellectual independence to really say no.
I totally agree with the last part of what Sami said, and we do have that problem. I would even go further to say that it's a cultural problem that sometimes the elite and even the regular people become very willing participants to whatever evil plans that the government perpetuates, and that creates a lot of bloodshed in our region, not only between Ethiopia and Eritrea, but it happened between Ethiopia and Somalia. I agree with you on that. But look, I didn't mean that you're radical and you're extremist. But usually, when somebody tells me that they are Marxist, that's how I believe them. To me, Marxism is an extreme form of politics. It has never showed itself to work anywhere else in the world. That's
maybe a clarification a little bit. My Marxism means I'm sympathetic towards Oromo peasants instead of, say, for instance, an urban elite from Addis Ababa, say, for instance. An example. My Marxism means it prepares me, or it should prepare me to have a solidarity or show solidarity with, the underprivileged. My inspiration are people like Wadali Mokanen, for instance, who were very brave enough to see oppression along, across ethnic lines, across class lines. So that kind of radical politics, something which allows you
to... I understand that. But even that is a little bit problematic with me. The reason for that is because Wadali Mokanen, to you, he's radical. But to us, he's somebody who actually have dismantled the societal rules. The principle of Wadali Mokanen is the reason why people are actually killing each other right now. That's what we believe. And when you say that the Oromos marginalized or pushed away people, and that's nothing can be further from the truth. And that's absolutely not true. You're just repeating what you hear from the elites. A city that's been burned down right now, a city of Shashamane, I know it very well. I know it intimately. You cannot tell me why it should be burned down because the rhetoric of the elite, that you think that they were pushed away from the center, which is absolutely not true. Again and again, I will say that to you. It's just not true. I don't believe that the marginalized and pushed away people should burn down their own city.
No, I don't mean either.
So,
I'm not also subscribing. I'm not saying that it's a good politics. What I'm saying is, I'm not only also subscribing to the elite narrative about Oromo and stuff, but peasants generally, for instance, Ethiopia is not Eritrea. Ethiopia is not an equal society, is it? We have class differences, we have ethnic differences, we have different kinds of differences, and always we should be with the underdogs, with the underprivileged.
But the differences are not as clear-cut as you put them out to be. Who are the underdogs? Even there's the line between the underdogs and those who are not underdogs is totally, it's very complex. And try to just describe it simply as you tried to do is not very much reflective of the situation.
By the way, I want to refer to Oromo peasants and stuff, even Amara, even Somalis, everybody. Like what I was referring is not only to ethnic marginalization, but also to the economic marginalization.
There are no peasants, by the way. Every single farmer actually owns their own land. Peasants are people who actually work for a landlord. They don't. They own their land, and there are no peasants in Ethiopia. To be honest with you, there are subsistence farmers. Anywhere in Ethiopia, the people who live by the land, they just own it. Actually, that's the only thing that Doug did well. When you say peasants, you sound like you're talking about a country that's under feudal lords, and that's not Ethiopia. That hasn't been Ethiopia for about 40 years.
But the state has been also at the forefront of dispossession of many people, right? Taking their lands, giving them to investors, that kind of thing. Like oppression has different forms.
That's urbanization. Look, urbanization created a problem around Addis Ababa. The same way it created a problem in Mekelle right now. The government needs some land to develop it. And the people who used to be farming that area, they were saying that the compensation that you're giving me is not enough. Therefore, I'm not going to give it to you. Started conflict. They started to have these arguments and fight with the state of Ethiopia, not with a landlord or their peasants, and they just wanted a kind of right that they used to demand during Haile Selassie. That's not the thing. This is a normal urbanization versus rural life that we see, a problem that we see in Brazil, the problem that we see in Argentina.
So speaking of questioning the status quo, this conversation reminded me of is like whenever an oppressed groups or a segment of a society that's marginalized, whenever they have their grievances put forward, it's very common for those who are in places of power or in places of privilege to dismiss it as something that is untrue or extremist or not factual. In Eritrea or in Ethiopia, whenever they bring their grievances, it's always dismissed by those who are kind of in the primary beneficiaries of the status quo. And as both of you are Christian Habesha men from Eritrea and Ethiopia, what should be your role? How would you support this group, even just to listen, to advance, a more inclusive and more egalitarian representation in this country? Do we even give it a space, like, to kind of have that discussion to get to the bottom of it. So like, what could be your role?
That's a very good question. I can give you an example. In Ethiopia, there are two protests, right? There was a protest that was conducted by a group of elites that I refer as, you're going to have to forgive me for using this word, ethno-fascists, because they are ethnic nationalists that push young people to do things, some of it unspeakable. Part of Oromia region, not even the entire Oromia region, in Eastern Oromia, part of Oromia region. So I condemn that. I condemn that. I oppose that. At the same time, in southern Ethiopia, there is an ethnic group that is demanding self-administration called the Walaita group. And the Walaita people, it's an ethnic group. The former Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Haile Mariam Desalegn, was from that ethnic group. And they demanded the government to give them a region, to make their region, to make their area a region so they can administer themselves. And they have conducted their protest in a manner that is absolutely civilized. That's something that I have never seen in Ethiopia, not even in Africa. But what did the government do? Because they got used to confronting other protesters, they came over here and they started shooting at them. And they killed plenty of them. Even then, after they were killed, they were demanding their rights, but they have never became violent. And that frustrated the government and started they have arrested their leaders before their protest started. They released everybody else because they were frustrated. They have never seen anything like this. And I have supported that. And that's my role. My role is to be with those who demand their rights legitimately, to be their voice, because I have a bigger platform. I get to speak people in different languages on their behalf. As long as they have not become criminals and they didn't burn down a city, they didn't kill anybody else, they didn't lynch anybody else, I will be with them with whatever questions that they have. But when they become criminals, anybody, Amhara group, Tigray group, Oromo group, anybody, anyone in Ethiopia, if they go and start burning down cities, lynching people, then I want law and order to be restored. And I would call for government to do something about it. But when the government shoots at peaceful protesters, I would not be with it. Our roles should be to advocate for people who demand their rights in a manner that is peaceful. That's one. Second one is, as far as I'm concerned, neither Ethiopia or Eritrea, only Christian countries. In the 21st context. So yes, I am a Christian male, but I have responsibility to accept that Ethiopia is a country of Christians and Muslims. And both of them have absolutely equal rights in that country. Both of them are owners of that country with no prejudice whatsoever. If I see a Christian violating a Muslim right, I have responsibility to speak against it. I would like to take that responsibility very seriously, as long as it's done in a manner that is peaceful and respects other people's human rights. But I don't believe that I should be privileged because I am male and Christian and Abisha. I am not. And I think that's the thing of the past in Ethiopia. Thank you.
Well, I understand that, for instance, I have all this privilege, as you say, the male Christian Highlander, for instance, in Eritrea. Now thinking back and remembering, for instance, my workspace, my school space, it was predominantly giving you an example, when I was a teaching assistant in the College of Arts in Social Sciences, we had a single woman, for instance. We have only one Nara, and so we dominantly were Christian male Eritreans working in that college as teaching assistants, as professors, and what have you. But when you see, like, when you ask people, say Christian Highlanders in Eritrea, if you ask them if there is a structural difference and structural oppression on women, on small minorities, ethnic minorities, they would tell you, no, Eritrea is, it's not like that. It's not as Nati said, it's not like it's a thing of the past. Today we are fine. But again, as reality shows, there are differences, and we should always be able to interrogate our privilege, our position in the society. We don't have a problem, for instance, getting a service from a government institution in our language. I don't have, for instance, a problem going to a government institution and get a service in Tigrinya. I don't face a problem because I speak Tigrinya, because I am a male, because I'm a Christian Highlander. I don't face a lot of problems, but I don't think that applies the same with other people who have a different ethnic background, who have a different religious background, who have a different gender background, sexual background, what have you. So the first step is to be mindful of this. And the second step is also not to be presumptuous enough to know the experience of other people. I don't know how other people are feeling. It's not my place, for instance, to tell them how to feel and how to articulate their experience. First, they are citizens like me, so they have the same right to express themselves. They have the same right to, articulate their problems, their concerns. And if they say they are oppressed, who am I to say, no, you're not oppressed? If they say, if they demand to have a better place in the society, to have a better representation, who am I to say they don't have a case? A democratic society would allow everybody, irrespective of gender, irrespective of ethnicity, irrespective of religion, to formulate their concerns. That should be the ideal society. I think that is the sort of responsibility that I would like to assume for myself, to facilitate, to play a part in the creation of such ideal society. Always mindful of my privilege, but also mindful of the different ways that people can understand their experience and formulate their concerns.
One thing I would like to say, actually didn't address, is Ethiopia is a very conservative society. So I'm very sad to say that it has not made as much advancement when it comes to women's rights as it should have. I mean, we have come some long way, but not enough. We have actually came a long way in accepting our linguistic and ethnic diversity, a lot more than we have accepted the rights of women. I don't know if I should say backward, but not progressive view of women in urban areas. And that's something that should be changed. And that's, I have to be honest with you, that's the only time that I do believe that I need to be mindful of my privilege a bit, but not about my religion and my ethnicity. It doesn't, it's really not very much helpful or advantageous more than anybody else to be a Christian or an Habesha in Ethiopia. One can be more advantageous to be male. That I acknowledge. So that's the only time that I am a little bit mindful that I am advantageous of being male. So we need to work on that a whole lot more in the future.
Can I say a little bit, one point, maybe 30 seconds about this? When I talk about how our societies privilege certain section, I don't mean like it's necessarily the present state's policy or deliberate design to privilege certain people and disadvantage other people. We might not see like certain policy instruments creating such kind of differences, but historically we cannot deny in the case of Ethiopia, for instance, that the Abyssinian core, the Christian core, was the dominant core. Even in the Ethiopian submission to the League of Nations in the 1930s, when Ethiopia was debating with Italy about the legitimacy of its nationhood, it was presenting itself as a Christian kingdom, as a Christian empire. Similarly, in the case of Eritrea, Eritreans who are especially not maybe Christians, but Highlanders have been a predominant group. That's probably not the making of the present state. It's probably a product of historical processes. But when we see the present reality, as I told you, for example, in the workplace that I used to work, there were not many, say, Afar Eritreans working in the college, for instance. You don't see Nara at all, or Kunama, or other ethnic minorities, and you don't see them in many government institutions. And that should tell you about the kind of structural differences that exist in our societies. And it is not probably your own fault. You are not probably actively complicit in such kind of differentiated society, but you might be unwittingly complicit in such kind of arrangement or reality, and you should always interrogate that. You should always see. You should always ask. You should always listen, because if you feel like there is no difference, and if other people are saying no, there is a difference, we are marginalized. Listen to them what they are saying. That's that's not a very difficult thing to do, is it? That's at least something that you can afford to do, because you are coming from a position of privilege. You don't have a problem, and if people are complaining, listen to them.
We are about to wrap our discussion for today. Any final remarks that you have? I'll give you 1 minute each.
We need to have these kinds of conversations a whole lot more. And we need to actually make our elites, our general public, to get used to these kinds of conversations, because we need it. And otherwise, we keep yelling at each other over everything that we disagree over everything that we disagree. First of all, we don't go anywhere. We don't advance anything. And secondly, we probably will be ending up to another unnecessary bloodshed. What happened in the 18th century should not very much affect our lives in the 21st century. That's the only way that we can advance and become better people, better nations.
Building on what Nati said, the first time that I met an Ethiopian is when I left Eritrea in 2015 in Turkey. And most of them were against the government that was in power back then. And I learned a lot. I understood we had the same sort of problem, when it comes to political oppression and, that sort of thing. So the idea of having a lot of conversations like this, the idea of, opening ourselves to different narratives, different discourses, trying to understand each other is, it's a good thing. It should happen. One of the things that I observed, for instance, when I left Eritrea and met many African students in Turkey, was that many West African students, many African students from the South were able to, for instance, talk about the same kind of music. They refer to the same kind of cultural icons. They didn't have any problem. Eritreans and Ethiopians were very isolated. Their cultural horizon is very limited. It's self-referential. It doesn't really go beyond the Horn of Africa. And if it goes beyond the Horn of Africa, it's so that kind of narrow cultural and national chauvinism should be opened up. It should be opened up, not only to, among Eritreans and Ethiopians, but we should expand our horizon and, be cool.
Well, thank you, Nathanael Burhane and Sami Elumaha, for coming here and for the lively discussion. Again, this show is a production of Asmarino and Eritrea Digest. Asmarino.com is celebrating its 23rd anniversary today. So congratulations again to Tasfaldet and all his colleagues. And thanks to our guests again, and be well.